5 people, 1 horrific event, 5 different versions of the truth. As we unravel the tangled web of lies and manipulation surrounding the massacre, we'll discover how a trusted leader's dark past led to the destruction of innocent lives. Nestled among rolling hills and lush forests, the town of Willowbrook seemed like a slice of paradise. Its quaint main street and friendly faces belied the darkness that would soon engulf this close-knit community. At the heart of Willowbrook stood a figure of immense charisma and influence, a leader whose very presence seemed to light up a room. To the outside world, this enigmatic individual was a beacon of hope and wisdom. Followers flocked to their teachings, drawn by promises of enlightenment and purpose. The community flourished under their guidance, growing into a tight-knit family bound by shared beliefs and unwavering loyalty. But beneath the surface, a sinister truth lay hidden. As the days passed, the facade began to crumble, revealing a web of lies and manipulation that would ultimately lead to unspeakable tragedy. The story that follows is not a simple tale of good and evil, but a complex tapestry woven from multiple perspectives, each shedding light on how trust can be weaponized with devastating consequences. As the community's facade cracked, one follower remained steadfast. What invisible chains bound her to a leader whose true nature was unraveling? Sarah's unwavering devotion would soon be put to the ultimate test, with catastrophic results. Sarah Thompson had always felt like an outsider, searching for a place to belong. When she first encountered the charismatic leader of Willowbrook's spiritual community, it was as if a light had been switched on in her world. His penetrating gaze and soothing words filled a void she hadn't even realized existed. At 32, Sarah found herself reborn, embracing the teachings that promised enlightenment and purpose. The community welcomed her with open arms, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly seen. She threw herself into every aspect of their shared existence, from daily meditation sessions to communal meals. The leader's words became her gospel, his vision her compass. "We are all seeking truth," he would often say, his voice a hypnotic blend of authority and compassion. But truth is not found in the world outside. It lies within each of us, waiting to be awakened. As months turned into years, Sarah's devotion only grew stronger. She rose through the ranks of the community, becoming one of the leader's most trusted confidants. Her days were filled with purpose, her nights with dreams of a brighter future. The outside world, with its chaos and confusion, faded into irrelevance. Within the sheltered confines of Willowbrook, Sarah had found her true family. But paradise, as they say, often comes at a price. Whispers of discontent began to ripple through the community. Some spoke of financial irregularities, others of inappropriate behavior by the leader. At first, Sarah dismissed these murmurs as the grumblings of those not fully committed to the path. Her faith, she believed, was unshakable. As the accusations grew louder, Sarah found herself thrust into the role of defender. She became the leader's staunchest advocate, tirelessly refuting claims and reassuring doubters. "You don't understand his methods," she would argue, her voice tinged with desperation. "His ways may seem unconventional, but they lead to true enlightenment. We must trust in his wisdom." Yet, even as she fought to maintain the community's unity, Sarah couldn't entirely silence the small voice of doubt that had begun to whisper in the back of her mind. She recalled moments when the leader's behavior had seemed erratic, his teachings contradictory. But to acknowledge these doubts felt like a betrayal of everything she had come to believe in. The cognitive dissonance Sarah experienced was profound. On one hand, she clung to the sense of belonging and purpose the community had given her. On the other, she couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that something was terribly wrong. This internal struggle manifested in physical symptoms: sleepless nights, loss of appetite, and a constant gnawing anxiety. It was during this tumultuous period that Sarah's faith faced its greatest test. A former member came forward with damning evidence of the leader's past. a history of fraud and manipulation that predated the formation of their community. The revelation sent shockwaves through Willowbrook, causing many to question everything they had believed. For Sarah, this moment became a crucible. She spent days in isolation, wrestling with her beliefs and the undeniable truth before her. The leader she had idolized, the man she had defended so vehemently, was not who he claimed to be. The foundation of her new life was crumbling beneath her feet. Yet, in a twist that would baffle outside observers, this crisis ultimately reinforced Sarah's devotion. Rather than abandoning her faith, she doubled down on it. He may have made mistakes in the past, she rationalized, but that doesn't negate the truth of his teachings now. We all have the capacity for growth and change. This decision, born from a complex mix of denial, fear, and a desperate need to belong, would set Sarah on a path toward the impending tragedy. Her unwavering loyalty, even in the face of damning evidence, made her an invaluable asset to the increasingly unstable leader. As his paranoia grew and his behavior became more erratic, Sarah remained by his side, blind to the danger that loomed on the horizon. As Sarah's unwavering faith cast a long shadow over Willowbrook, a newcomer's trained eye began to pierce through the community's carefully constructed veneer. Michael Rawson, a 38-year-old psychologist with a penchant for understanding group dynamics, arrived in the idyllic town with a mixture of professional curiosity and personal interest. Little did he know that his expertise would soon unravel years of carefully crafted illusions, setting in motion a chain of events that would shake the community to its core. At first glance, Michael was captivated by the seemingly harmonious atmosphere that permeated Willowbrook. The leader's charisma was undeniable, his words weaving a tapestry of hope and enlightenment that appeared to resonate deeply with his followers. Michael found himself drawn into the community's orbit, attending gatherings and engaging in conversations that left him both intrigued and slightly unsettled. It was during one of these meetings that Michael's professional instincts began to prickle. The leader's rhetoric, while inspiring on the surface, carried undertones that set off alarm bells in Michael's mind. He noticed subtle manipulation techniques, the strategic use of loaded language, the creation of an us versus them mentality, and the subtle discouragement of critical thinking. These tactics, familiar to Michael from his studies of cult psychology, were expertly woven into the fabric of the leader's teachings. As days turned into weeks, Michael's unease grew. He observed how the community members, including the devoted Sarah, seemed to hang on the leader's every word, their identities slowly being subsumed by the group's collective consciousness. The leader's influence extended far beyond spiritual matters, seeping into every aspect of the followers' lives, from their daily routines to their most intimate relationships. Michael's attempts to engage in meaningful dialogue about these observations were met with resistance. Community members dismissed his concerns as the misunderstandings of an outsider, unable to grasp the depth of their shared vision. "You haven't experienced the transformation yet," they would say, their eyes gleaming with a fervor that sent shivers down Michael's spine. "Once you truly open yourself to the teachings, you'll understand." But Michael couldn't shake the growing sense of foreboding that gripped him. He began to notice more overt signs of instability in the leader's behavior, mood swings that oscillated between messianic grandiosity and paranoid suspicion, inconsistencies in the teachings that were explained away as evolving wisdom, and an increasingly authoritarian approach to dissent within the ranks. The turning point came during a private conversation with one of the newer members, a young woman named Lisa. Her eyes darted nervously as she confided in Michael, sharing her doubts and fears about the community's direction. "Sometimes, I feel like I'm losing myself," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But every time I try to voice my concerns, I'm told that it's just my ego resisting enlightenment. I don't know what to believe anymore." Lisa's words crystallized Michael's suspicions. He realized that the manipulative tactics he had observed were not just the missteps of an overzealous spiritual leader, but a deliberate and systemic approach to control. The community of Willowbrook, he now understood, was teetering on the edge of something far more sinister than a simple spiritual retreat. Driven by a sense of ethical responsibility, Michael decided to dig deeper into the leader's past. He reached out to colleagues in the psychology community, seeking any information about similar groups or leaders with matching descriptions. As he pieced together fragments of information, a disturbing picture began to emerge, one of a man with a history of exploiting vulnerable individuals for personal gain. Michael's investigation led him to uncover a trail of broken lives and shattered communities left in the wake of the leader's previous incarnations. Each story echoed with familiar themes: promises of enlightenment, demands for unwavering loyalty, and the gradual erosion of personal autonomy. The leader, it seemed, was not just a misguided spiritual seeker, but a calculating predator with a long history of manipulation and abuse. Armed with this knowledge, Michael faced a daunting challenge. How could he convince the devoted followers of Willowbrook, people like Sarah who had invested years of their lives into the community, that their beloved leader was not who he claimed to be? And more urgently, how could he prevent the looming tragedy that his instincts told him was on the horizon? As Michael's investigation hit a dead end, fate intervened in the form of a chance encounter that would change everything. Elena Cortez, a striking woman in her mid-40s with haunted eyes and a nervous demeanor, carried the weight of a terrible secret. Her story would reveal a descent into madness that began long before Willowbrook's inception, shedding light on the twisted path that led to the community's creation. Elena's history with the leader of Willowbrook stretched back over a decade, to a time when he was simply known as Daniel Roth. Their relationship had begun like a whirlwind romance, full of passion and promises of a shared destiny. Daniel's charisma and vision had swept Elena off her feet, convincing her that together they could change the world. "He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person who mattered," Elena recalled, her voice trembling with a mixture of longing and fear. "When he spoke about his plans for spiritual enlightenment, it was like he could see into the future. I was completely enthralled." But as the months wore on, Elena began to notice cracks in Daniel's carefully crafted persona. His mood swings became more pronounced, oscillating between messianic fervor and dark, brooding silences. He would disappear for days at a time, returning with grand plans and pockets full of cash, the origins of which he refused to disclose. Elena's concerns were met with a mixture of charm and gaslighting. "You're just not ready to understand the bigger picture," Daniel would say, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. "Trust in me, and all will be revealed in time." As Daniel's behavior grew more erratic, Elena found herself caught in a web of manipulation and control. He began to isolate her from friends and family, claiming that they were negative influences that would hinder their spiritual growth. Their once passionate relationship devolved into a toxic dance of emotional abuse and reconciliation. "I felt like I was losing my mind," Elena confessed, her hands shaking as she recounted those dark days. "One moment, he'd be showering me with affection, and the next, he'd be accusing me of betraying him. I never knew which version of Daniel I'd be facing." The turning point came on a rain-soaked night in April. Elena had returned home early from a work trip to find Daniel in a state of manic excitement. The living room was strewn with maps, financial documents, and notebooks filled with frenzied scribbling. As she approached, Daniel looked up at her with eyes that seemed to burn with an otherworldly fire. "I've found it, Elena," he exclaimed, gesturing wildly at the papers around him. "The perfect location for our new beginning, a place where we can build a community of true believers, free from the corruption of the outside world." As Daniel laid out his vision for what would eventually become Willowbrook, Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The man she loved was slipping away, replaced by someone she barely recognized. But it wasn't until she stumbled upon a hidden folder in Daniel's desk that the full extent of his deception became clear. Inside, she found evidence of a dark past that Daniel had carefully concealed. Police reports, restraining orders, and news clippings told a story of financial fraud, emotional manipulation, and destroyed lives stretching back years before they had met. The Daniel she knew was a carefully constructed facade, hiding a predator who had left a trail of broken souls in his wake. Horrified by her discovery, Elena knew she had to escape. In the dead of night, she packed a bag and fled, leaving behind the life she had built with Daniel and the dreams they had shared. For years, she lived in fear, constantly looking over her shoulder, convinced that he would find her and exact his revenge. "I should have spoken up sooner," Elena said, her voice heavy with regret. "But I was so afraid. Daniel had a way of making threats sound like promises, and I believed he would destroy me if I ever betrayed him." As Elena finished her story, Michael felt a mix of horror and vindication. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, revealing a picture far more sinister than he had imagined. But with this new knowledge came a terrible responsibility. The clock was ticking, and the fate of an entire community hung in the balance. While Elena's story painted a chilling picture of Willowbrook's origins, it was only the beginning. What dark secrets could turn even the most devoted follower into a whistleblower, the tale of David, the leader's most trusted lieutenant, would expose the rot at the core of the seemingly idyllic community and set the stage for its violent unraveling. David Harrison had been by the leader's side from the very inception of Willowbrook. A tall, broad-shouldered man with piercing blue eyes and a disarming smile, David exuded an air of quiet confidence that inspired trust in those around him. He had first met Daniel Roth, now known simply as the Teacher, at a self-help seminar over a decade ago. The two men had formed an instant connection, their shared vision of a better world drawing them together like moths to a flame. As Willowbrook grew from a handful of devoted followers to a thriving community, David's unwavering loyalty and organizational skills proved invaluable. He became the Teacher's right-hand man, handling the day-to-day operations of the community and acting as a buffer between the enigmatic leader and his flock. To the outside world, David was the face of Willowbrook, articulate, charismatic, and seemingly transparent. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form in David's carefully constructed world. It started with small inconsistencies, financial discrepancies that didn't quite add up, private conversations with the Teacher that left him feeling uneasy. At first, David dismissed these doubts as mere growing pains, the inevitable challenges of building a utopia in a flawed world. As the months wore on, however, the red flags became harder to ignore. David noticed a shift in the Teacher's behavior, a growing paranoia that manifested in increasingly erratic decisions. The once inclusive community meetings became closed-door affairs, with only a select inner circle privy to the Teacher's true plans. The turning point came on a crisp autumn evening, when David stumbled upon a scene that would forever alter his perception of the man he had come to view as a brother. Hidden away in a secluded cabin on the outskirts of the Willowbrook property, he found the Teacher in a state of drug-induced mania, surrounded by documents detailing elaborate schemes to defraud wealthy followers and stockpile weapons. David's world imploded in that moment. The foundation of his beliefs crumbled, leaving him adrift in a sea of doubt and betrayal. He spent sleepless nights wrestling with his conscience, torn between his loyalty to the community he had helped build and the horrifying truth he now possessed. As David grappled with his internal turmoil, he began to notice other disturbing changes within Willowbrook. The once open discussions gave way to mandatory re-education sessions for those who dared to question the Teacher's wisdom. Longtime members disappeared without explanation, their names erased from community records as if they had never existed. The final straw came when David overheard plans for a purification ritual that sounded alarmingly like a mass suicide pact. The Teacher, his voice filled with a fervor that bordered on madness, spoke of a great ascension that would cleanse the community of its doubters and elevate the true believers to a higher plane of existence. In that moment, David knew he could no longer remain silent. The weight of his knowledge threatened to crush him, but the potential consequences of inaction were too horrific to contemplate. With trembling hands, he began to compile evidence, financial records, witness statements, and his own detailed accounts of the teacher's descent into paranoia and megalomania. As dawn broke over Willowbrook, David made his decision. He would confront the teacher, armed with the truth and the hope that some glimmer of the man he once knew still remained. But as he approached the teacher's private quarters, a sense of foreboding washed over him. The community he had helped build, the dream he had poured his heart and soul into, was balanced on a knife's edge. As David grappled with his devastating realization, another set of eyes turned their gaze upon Willowbrook. Lena Matthews, her sharp green eyes scanning the compound's perimeter, felt a familiar chill run down her spine. What horrors lay hidden behind the smiling faces and pristine buildings of this so-called utopia? Lena had built her career on exposing the darkest corners of society, but nothing could have prepared her for the twisted web of lies and manipulation she was about to unravel. At 35, she was already a veteran investigative journalist with a string of high-profile exposés under her belt. Her latest assignment had brought her to the outskirts of Willowbrook, drawn by whispers of a charismatic leader and a community that seemed too good to be true. From her vantage point on a nearby hillside, Lena observed the daily routines of Willowbrook's residents. She watched as they moved about their tasks with an eerie synchronicity, their faces set in expressions of serene contentment. But Lena's trained eye caught glimpses of something darker beneath the surface. Furtive glances, hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when others approached, and the occasional flash of fear in a follower's eyes. As she delved deeper into her investigation, Lena began piecing together a disturbing picture of life within Willowbrook. Former members, speaking in hushed tones and constantly looking over their shoulders, painted a picture of a community ruled by fear and manipulation. They spoke of sleep deprivation, forced labor, and a system of punishment for those who dared to question the teacher's authority. One former member, a woman named Rachel, recounted her experience with trembling hands. "At first, it was beautiful," she whispered. "We thought we were building a better world. But then the rules started changing. Suddenly, everything we did was wrong. The teacher said it was for our own good, that we needed to be purified. But I saw the truth in his eyes. He enjoyed our suffering." Lena's investigation took a darker turn when she began digging into the teacher's past. What she uncovered sent shockwaves through her very core. The man, now known as the teacher, had a long history of fraud, embezzlement, and allegations of sexual abuse. He had reinvented himself multiple times, leaving a trail of broken lives and shattered communities in his wake. As she corroborated her findings with law enforcement agencies across the country, Lena realized the full scope of the danger facing Willowbrook's residents. The teacher wasn't just a charismatic fraud. He was a predator with a history of violence and a penchant for pushing his followers to extreme acts. Lena's heart raced as she uncovered financial records showing massive stockpiles of weapons and suspicious chemical purchases. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, revealing a picture more horrifying than she could have imagined. This wasn't just a story of financial fraud or emotional manipulation. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. With trembling hands, Lena reached out to her contacts in law enforcement, urging them to take immediate action. But bureaucracy moved slowly, and Lena knew that time was running out. She could feel the tension building within Willowbrook, even from her distant vantage point. The teacher's speeches, once filled with promises of enlightenment, had taken on a darker, more apocalyptic tone. As the sun set on another day, Lena made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't wait for the authorities to act. With her camera in hand and her heart pounding in her chest, she prepared to infiltrate Willowbrook itself. She knew the risks were enormous. If caught, she would likely face the full wrath of the teacher and his most devoted followers. But the faces of those she had interviewed haunted her dreams. The fear in their eyes, the tremor in their voices as they recounted their experiences. It all drove Lena forward. She had uncovered the truth, and now she had a responsibility to bring it to light before it was too late. While Lena raced against time, the community she sought to save was already spiraling into chaos. Inside Willowbrook's walls, a far more sinister transformation was unfolding. The teacher, once a beacon of charisma and hope, had begun to unravel at an alarming rate. His carefully constructed facade cracked under the weight of mounting paranoia and unchecked power. Longtime followers noticed subtle changes at first. The teacher's sermons, once filled with promises of enlightenment, took on a darker tone. He spoke of impending doom, of enemies lurking in the shadows, waiting to tear down everything they had built. His eyes, once warm and inviting, now burned with a feverish intensity that sent shivers down the spines of even his most devoted disciples. As days passed, the teacher's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would disappear for hours, only to emerge disheveled and wild-eyed, spouting incomprehensible prophecies. Loyal followers like Sarah Thompson found themselves torn between their unwavering faith and the growing unease that gnawed at their conscience. They whispered among themselves, trying to rationalize the inexplicable changes in their beloved leader. The community's daily routines, once a model of harmony and purpose, descended into chaos. The teacher's paranoia infected every aspect of Willowbrook life. Mandatory purification sessions replaced meditation, where followers were forced to confess imagined sins and betrayals. Those who dared to question were publicly shamed, their doubts labeled as spiritual weakness. David Harrison, the teacher's once trusted lieutenant, watched in horror as the man he had admired for years transformed into a tyrant. He witnessed the teacher's private moments of madness, ranting about cosmic conspiracies and divine retribution. The stockpile of weapons, once justified as protection against outside threats, now loomed as a terrifying possibility in the hands of an unstable leader. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a celebration of Willowbrook's founding. The entire community gathered in the central pavilion, an air of nervous anticipation hanging over the crowd. The teacher emerged, his appearance shocking even to those who had seen his recent decline. His hair was wild, his eyes sunken and feverish. He gripped the podium with white-knuckled intensity. What followed was a speech that would forever shatter the illusion of Willowbrook's utopia. The teacher's words poured forth in a torrent of paranoid delusions and megalomaniacal proclamations. He spoke of a great cleansing, a purge that would separate the true believers from the doubters. His voice rose to a fever pitch as he declared himself a living God, chosen to lead his flock to salvation through fire and blood. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of horror, disbelief, and fanatical agreement. Some followers fell to their knees, overcome by the teacher's fervor. Others began to back away, the scales finally falling from their eyes. Sarah Thompson, her face a mask of anguish, clung to her faith even as doubt threatened to overwhelm her. David Harrison stood frozen, the weight of his knowledge and inaction crushing him. As the teacher's rant reached its crescendo, chaos erupted. A group of followers, their faces alight with zealotry, rushed forward to pledge their undying loyalty. Others turned and fled, their screams of terror piercing the night air. The teacher, lost in his own madness, seemed to revel in the pandemonium he had unleashed. In the midst of the turmoil, a small group of clear-headed followers led by David attempted to restore order. They pleaded with their friends and family members to see reason, to recognize the dangerous precipice on which they stood. But their voices were drowned out by the teacher's continued ravings and the clash of conflicting emotions that swept through the crowd. The situation teetered on the brink of violence. Long-simmering tensions between devoted believers and secret doubters erupted into shoving matches and heated arguments. The teacher, his eyes wild with a mixture of triumph and madness, called for his most loyal followers to prove their devotion by any means necessary. As the night wore on, Willowbrook fractured into factions. A core group of fanatics barricaded themselves in the main compound with the teacher, while others sought refuge in outlying buildings or fled into the surrounding forest. The air was thick with fear, confusion, and the terrifying certainty that something irreversible had been set in motion.